Hello, my friends. My name is Gerdes, and I have 5 big stories to talk about today. So, the first one is this. The ISW stresses the need for Ukraine to target Russian air defenses to effectively integrate F-16s into its military operations. But that's not all. The ISW continues to assess that Ukraine will need substantial number of F-16s in order to field them at scale necessary for Ukraine to succeed in integrating fixed-wing aircraft into its wider air defense umbrella. So they started with 6 planes. They now have 10. By the end of the year, they're going to have 20. Now, that doesn't sound like a lot, and it's not. By the end of 2025, they should have upwards of about 80. They assess that they need at least 130 in order to match the other side, and probably more than that. But nonetheless, every one that they get is a step closer toward leveling the playing field in this regard. Ukraine will notably need to continue efforts to target Russian air defense assets with the Russian rear and in occupied Ukraine and Western provided long-range weapons to enable its use of F-16 jets. So they need to take air defense down in order to be able to fly them without getting them shot down. Russian military, now this was really interesting too. Russian military bloggers have been attempting to minimize the potential battlefield impact of Ukraine receiving F-16s, contradicting Russian information campaigns that have previously depicted the provision of such Western weaponry as an uncrossable red line. Remember how if you get F-16s, it's going to be nuclear war, right? Well, they got them and that came and went. Meanwhile, Russia has repeatedly proven that the invocation of supposed red lines is a reflexive control technique intended to force the West into self-deterring against providing Ukraine with additional military aid. I've said it before, I'll say it again, I'll keep saying it. Putin has deterred Biden. And I'm not trying to say that like it's not a political point. Putin has effectively deterred the West over and over and over again. How long did it take F-16s? I know it takes a while to train. For 890 days for getting F-16s. Again, I mean, I'm not scoring political points. This is just a reality. We have self-deterred again and again and again and again. And the consequence of that is that Ukrainians die on the battlefield. Okay, so that's the F-16 issue. Now, let's switch gears to big story number 2. Kara-Murza and Yashin argue against Russian sanctions, but doing so would increase Putin. Now, these are 2 of the Russian dissidents that were exchanged recently, but doing so would increase Putin's funding of war. So effectively, when they think they argue to help Russian people, they commit more Russians and Ukrainians to die. Here's the proof. So what's the effect of sanctions? At KSE Institute, that's the Kyiv School of Economics, reports that Russian oil sanctions have imposed estimated export losses of $78.5 billion between December 2022 and June 2024. Now, that's nothing to sneeze at. $78.5 billion has been taken off the table because of the sanctions. It's significant. What would these funds have been spent on? Would they have helped the Russian people? Would Putin fund education or pensions or healthcare? No, it would have gone into the war machine. So it's not a small thing. Now, sanctions alone don't do it, but sanctions can be helpful. The KSE Institute shows that despite sanctions, Russia's macroeconomic and fiscal stability remains intact, with oil export earnings averaging $17.3 billion per month in H1 2024 and projected current account surplus of over $80 billion for full of 2024. Now, that doesn't mean the whole economy is healthy. In fact, it's not healthy in some regards, and you can look to Joe Blogs to see about that. This is the key. Sanctions have denied Russia additional budget revenues, that's true, but haven't generated an economic crisis, that's also true. It's just not severe enough. It hasn't disrupted macroeconomic stability or hurt the public in any other way. The Russian budget deficit is smaller than planned. The deficit is mainly due to increased defense spending. Every extra dollar Russia gets goes to defense production and military operations in Ukraine, not to the public, as civilians' spending needs are already met. If anything, sanctions should be strengthened and not dropped. They should be significantly sanctioned, in my opinion. Okay, let's turn our attention to big story number 3, Iran and Israel. What's going on there? U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken told G7 allies that Iran could attack Israel within the next 24 to 48 hours. President Joe Biden is convening his national security team on Monday to discuss developments in the Middle East. It's looking like something's about to happen. An Iranian parliament member has called for the assassination of Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in retaliation for the elimination of Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran. I hope that, by the way, that strike was surgical. It was going for that one guy. It wasn't blowing up a whole bunch of stuff. So the idea that they're just wantonly trying to blow everyone up is kind of not fair. I hope that another Operation True Promise will be carried out as blood revenge for Ismail Haniyeh. We will not agree to anything less than Netanyahu's death, the lawmaker said. Osmani said Israel is so brazen that it is already spilling the blood of a guest in Tehran, and Iran will choose the right moment to avenge Haniyeh's death. So, okay. In other news, Israel Defense Forces reported the elimination of Hamas economy minister Abdel Fattah Azaria in the Gaza Strip. So that's not likely to win more friends and influence people. Now, what does this have to do with Russia and Ukraine and that sort of thing? EU adds 28 individuals involved in human rights violations to Belarus sanctions list. Oh, by the way, this is Lukashenko with, yep, you guessed it. And here's Sergei Shoigu. Former Russian Defense Minister Shoigu has arrived in Iran, where he will meet with the President, Secretary of the Supreme National Security Council, and the head of the General Staff. All this is taking place against the backdrop of escalating tensions in the Middle East and the threat of war between Israel, Iran, and Lebanon. Okay. Prime Minister Netanyahu declares Israel is engaged in a multi-front war with Iran and its proxies, and they are. And that's the reality. Times of Israel. Israel is considering a preemptive strike on Iran. On the eve of the meeting of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu with senior security officials discussed the possibility of a preemptive strike against Iran if an attack from its side is considered inevitable. Well, they're saying they're about to do it, and about to do it within 24 or 48 hours, something along those lines. It seems pretty inevitable. Now, the whole situation just gets uglier. The UN has admitted that its staff may have taken part in the October 7 massacre in Israel that kicked this whole thing off. 9 staff members of the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestinian Refugees may have been involved in the October 7, 2023 Hamas attack on Israel, and their employment will be terminated, according to Reuters, citing a UN statement. Oh boy. Now let's turn our attention to Venezuela. What's kicked off there about a week ago. Maduro has claimed that he won the presidency, although it looks like 2-1 he lost. So now, with Russia's backing, Maduro is another brick in the wall of Putin's anti-American coalition. Voices across the globe express concern over increasing arrests in Venezuela after the disputed election. Pope Francis said that Venezuela is living a critical situation in his traditional Sunday remarks to the Vatican, adding, "I appeal to all parties to seek truth to avoid all kinds of violence." Maduro threatened to arrest his opponent Gonzalez for not showing up at the Electoral Council meeting that he had been summoned to. The council, like most parts of Venezuela's government, is completely controlled by Maduro, so Gonzalez is probably trying to dodge arrest. "You face serious legal consequences for disobeying the Constitution, the courts, and the law," Maduro said of Gonzalez. Maduro also vowed to continue to use a heavy hand against his opponents, saying 2,000 of them have been arrested already. This time there will be no pardon. This time there will be tokron. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, but that's the name of a notorious Venezuelan prison. So there's that. And then, in another article, Venezuela's opposition called on armed forces to ditch support for Maduro in post-election crisis. We don't see that happening so far. They've shown no signs of ditching Maduro, even in the face of credible evidence presented by the opposition that had trounced the self-proclaimed socialist at the polls by more than 2-1. So that's what's going on in Venezuela. RT on Venezuela. Venezuela could transfer the development rights to its vast oil and gas fields that are currently operated by American energy companies to entities from BRIC nations, President Maduro warned on Friday during a press conference in Caracas. So, I mean, the story just keeps getting worse. Let's turn our attention to Taiwan. Taiwan released a 17-minute trailer for the upcoming 10-episode TV series Zero Day Attack to prepare the population for a Chinese invasion. I'll put the link to this below if you want to see this. Now, let's listen to this just quickly, just a review of this on television.
All right, that was a trailer, okay, guys, not real life. A trailer of the new TV series in Taiwan. It's called 0 Day, and it's really kind of sparking a lot of intense discussions over there in Taiwan. It's 18 minutes long, this trailer itself, but really it's talking about a possible Chinese attack. And really, this trailer dropped just as the island held its annual air raid drills. And the show has really stirred a lot of feelings of anxiety for some Taiwanese viewers and prompting calls for maybe more discussions about this. Let's bring in our Bloomberg Global Business Editor, Samson Ellis. He joins us from Taipei with all this. Samson, why is it creating such panic right now?
Well, as you touched upon just there, as someone who lives in Taiwan, thank God it is just a trailer for now. But as for why this is attracting so much attention and discussion here in Taiwan, it's very unusual for a TV series or a movie or popular culture in general to confront the threat that Taiwan faces every single day quite so head on. Like, everybody here knows that, you know, China does claim Taiwan as part of its territory, a claim that the government in Taiwan rejects. So that threat of a military invasion by China is something Taiwanese live with every single day.
Yeah, that's where the Ukrainians are. They live with it every day. It's just a threat in Taiwan for now. Okay. Now, somebody in the comments put, this looks very familiar, as Finland has produced such films before too. One in 1998 and one in 2020. Yeah, they did. Like, Finland has its own version, like 20-minute version of this kind of, they're being invaded. Okay, axis of instability, this is another story, but it ties everything together. Potential impact of a U.S. less willing to support its allies. What would that look like? So, during his first term as president, Donald Trump raised doubts about whether the U.S. would defend NATO and other allies. Should the U.S. presidential and congressional elections result in diminished U.S. supply of military support for Ukraine, there are several possible consequences. One, dictatorships would be emboldened to launch attacks elsewhere. That's right. Same thing as if Ukraine loses, dictatorships will be emboldened elsewhere. Two, U.S. allies, among others, are going to try to acquire nuclear weapons. They're not going to, oh, I'm safe under the U.S. umbrella. No. They're going to be looking for it. In fact, Russia would have been rolled by now had it not been for their nuclear weapons. And Ukraine is only being attacked because they gave away their nuclear weapons. So the lesson to the rest of the world is get nuclear weapons so this doesn't happen to you, or so that you can take advantage of other nations. U.S. allies make other arrangements, such as alliances among themselves. Now, they're going to be different, but yeah, you see this already starting to form with Asia-Pacific nations like Japan, South Korea, Australia, New Zealand, and the Philippines, and maybe even Taiwan cooperating against China. Some U.S. allies might cozy up to U.S. adversaries such as Russia and China, like Viktor Orban's doing, in order to think, it's probably going to be better on that side. And then conflict is likely to spread, and there's shifting dynamics of power and influence. In the absence of any other benevolent great power emerging that can take up the burden of supplying security and support if the U.S. is unwilling to do so, America and its allies may find that rising adversarial powers will be in better position to further their own economic interest at the expense of the U.S. and its allies. And the market really doesn't like it. The market is plummeting today. Now, there are other issues within the market. I'm not enough of an economist to say exactly what those are. So there's that, but the market also just does not like instability, which we're seeing in spades. So last little bit, you see things on Twitter that are just insane sometimes. Here's the easiest way to get engagement on Twitter. Take screenshots of a normal U.S. military activity over the U.S. and then comment, "This is not normal." You can do that with almost anything. Just say, "This is not normal," and people will just, what's going on? And conspiracy theorists will come out of the woodworks. Okay, my friends, that's all that I have for you. Thank you for the time. Thank you for the likes, the shares, and the subscribes. And thank you for being the kind of person that cares about Ukraine.